Understanding films is overrated. Knowing every detail of what you just watched and what it means, totally unnecessary. You know, there's a real beauty in the enigmatic, and that leads us to fawn over films that, at times, do their very best to confound us. In fairness to these films, if just the vibes are enough to carry us through without any real understanding, then that's quite a credit to the filmmaker. With that in mind, I'm Amy from What Culture, and here are the 10 most disorientating horror films. 10. Mother. There is some debate as to whether this film should be classed as a horror, but given its psychological elements and its at times very horrific subject matter, I think it's pretty valid to say it fits nicely into the genre. Jennifer Lawrence stars in this film as the guiding light through 2 hours of sheer confusion, and even then she, at points, shines pretty dimly. After opening with some very beautiful but completely nonsensical scenery, one hopes that the film will start to make more sense as it continues, and one is inevitably disappointed. Mother and her partner live in a glorious house that is gradually invaded and destroyed. The house morphs shape and size, changes in appearance and location and purpose, all in response to what's going on in and around it. As Mother's house turns into a living hell, we're constantly kept on our toes trying to keep up, and even then we struggle. The overall meanings and metaphors work very well and are represented with some really stunning filmmaking here, but trust me when I say that that doesn't stop the film from at times being utterly confusing. 9. Excision. Our teenage protagonist, Pauline, has dreams of becoming a surgeon, but things aren't going to be easy for her. Her younger sister suffers from cystic fibrosis, her family dynamic is less than stellar, and despite her apparent dreams of going into medicine, she seems to have absolutely no interest in school whatsoever. Oh, and also, on top of that, she's just a really weird kid. The film is at best confusing, and at worst, downright uncomfortable to watch sometimes. Aside from Pauline's weird behaviour in the waking world, her dreams betray a much darker nature. She fantasizes about bloody, bizarre sexual scenarios, ranging from having violent intercourse in a bed soaked with blood, through to having 3 strangers suckle on her 6 imaginary nipples like they're her weird puppies. Nope, I can't believe I just had to say that sentence either. Her behaviour escalates into the extreme, with those around her having less and less of a clue how to deal with her. By the end of the film, I can't think of a single person who would know how to deal with her. There's some properly gross imagery in this flick, and it's safe to say that none of it really makes any sense. 8. The Endless. Come on, we all love a cult-based horror, especially when it's a UFO death cult, because not one single part of that sentence doesn't sound exciting. The cult in question operates out of a place called Camp Arcadia, a camp which our protagonists, brothers Justin and Aaron, attended as children. Immediately on their return to the camp as adults, they realise things aren't as they should be, with the camp existing as if in its own dream world, or nightmare world, depending on who you ask. The brothers notice that nobody's aged in decades, that everyone keeps talking about some mysterious ascension, that they all think it's totally fine and totally normal to play tug of war with an unknown entity above the clouds, and that there's a frankly silly amount of moons knocking about in the sky. Basically, everything's gone bloody crazy. As the brothers explore more around the camp and the cult, things only get more nightmarish, and their lives and the world as they know it start to transform. Without relying purely on obnoxious visuals, this film delivers a disorientating, engaging plot driven forward by some really solid performances. 7. Mandy. Any film that features psychedelics is guaranteed to be dysphoric in certain ways, and 2018's Mandy shows this perfectly. Mandy's not a fun film by any means, which is pretty evident in its premise of a demonic biker gang tormenting 2 small townspeople. With everything from drug trips and mystical ocarinas to barbed wire gags and giant black wasp venom, the film raises a million questions which it answers with a million more. The visuals, whilst headache-inducing at times, are pretty damn impressive. Its saturated colour and drifting camera work helps bring the audience in as if we're experiencing the same trip that our characters are subject to. If you're after some angry Nick Cage, some spiked LSD and some bizarre cult behaviour, then buckle up and immerse yourself in the wild world of Mandy. 6. Eraserhead. Taking a step back in time now, we're going to look at 1977's Eraserhead, a film widely recognised as being one of the most off-putting and seemingly nonsensical masterpieces in horror history. Director and writer David Lynch is, these days, a seasoned and respected professional, but even he had to start somewhere. Eraserhead was his directorial debut, and it almost didn't get off the ground in the first place. The American Film Institute didn't want to help produce a film that was so surrealist and non-linear, and oh boy, is it both of those things. The film was partially inspired by Lynch's fear of parenthood, rooted in the issues with the birth of his daughter Jennifer, and if you've seen the baby that the film essentially revolves around, then you might wonder why Jennifer wasn't slightly insulted by this fact. It would be hard to say the film has a plot as such, but it follows a man named Spencer attempting to care for his alien-like baby in a surreal, depressing world. With extensive visual metaphors and numerous confounding set pieces, you'll get to the end of this movie without really knowing what you just watched, but still being glad you watched it anyway. 5. She Dies Tomorrow. Funnily enough, some of the top searches when you type this film into the search bar are She Dies Tomorrow Explained or She Dies Tomorrow Meaning. In fairness, the plot does sound like it should be one big, profound metaphor, it's just that most of us can't figure out what that is by the end of it. The movie concerns a fear that spreads like an infection, in which those who are infected suddenly know that they're going to die the following day. It plays out as a melodrama interspersed with surreal, nightmarish, or just downright weird scenes, including an extended sequence in which protagonist Amy just goes around her house feeling different textures. Riveting stuff. It fits the abstract concept to have similarly wacky visuals, and mixing them amongst the more traditionally shot scenes makes the film all the more engaging for how it flows. You're not sure if what you're watching unfold is the product of the characters' minds, whether it has deeper meaning, or whether it's a kind of supernatural situation. It's certainly an intriguing bit of film though, and given that it came out in 2020, its premise is somewhat reflective of the world's fear and uncertainty through the last year or so. 4. Inland Empire. I will watch anything with Laura Dern in it, and as far as her filmography goes, this definitely isn't a bad addition to it. Here, Dern plays Nikki, a Los Angeles-based actress around whom the film revolves. Nikki's latest endeavour is working on a remake of an old German film. It's believed to be a cursed project as it was last abandoned following the murders of its two leads, and she soon realises that things are definitely wrong when she accidentally stumbles back in time through a studio door. Things descend into chaos as Nikki embodies her character, wanders the streets of a confusing world, and sees the scenes of the film overlapping into real life. It's up to us to work out where we are, who we trust, and what it all means. Or whilst surrealist director David Lynch laughs at us from afar, you're guaranteed a wild ride with Lynch, and this one is another of his greats, one that's sure to haunt your mind long after its conclusion. 3. Possessor. Certainly if you're a fan of what culture horror, you'll be very familiar with this one. Brandon Cronenberg's 2020 release was his second venture into feature film, following his debut with equally uncomfortable Antiviral from 2012. Both of his films are upsetting and impressive in their own rights, and with Possessor's interesting high concept, audiences were definitely hooked from the offset. The film follows an assassin who carries out her killings by having her consciousness implanted into other people's bodies. Is it a bit bleak? Yeah, but is it also very, very cool? Absolutely. Unexpectedly, she encounters a problem on what should have been a routine mission, in which her host body manages to retain enough control over his body to prevent her from committing her proxy suicide. This leaves her stuck in the host body, all whilst the host's consciousness is fighting back, unsurprisingly leading to some really dysphoric and unnerving happenings. All the hype around it is for good reason, and for all its merits, it fits perfectly onto this list in the best kind of way. 2. I'm thinking of ending things. If you were to just turn this film on and start watching from a random point, there isn't a chance in hell you'd be able to figure out what was going on. But then again, the same is true for if you watch it from start to finish, the fact is that you'll only still stand a slim chance of having any idea what you've just watched. This film is about as Charlie Kaufman as Charlie Kaufman can get. Acting as screenwriter, director, and producer, Kaufman manufactured his masterpiece based on a 2016 novel by Ian Reid. The film sees a young woman travel with her new boyfriend, Jake, to visit his parents in their isolated farmhouse. In some ways, it's a slow descent into madness, but in other ways, you're thrown in right away. Within the first few minutes of the film, you're already being teased with some really jarring bits of dialogue. As things get increasingly disorientating, the film plays with aspects of body horror, non-linear narrative, and unreliable narrators. Basically, you don't know what's real and what's not. For a film with a pretty standard runtime of 2 hours, you do come out the end feeling like you've just outlived another lifetime. 1. Climax. Once again, psychedelic drugs are coming into play on this list. This film follows a dance troupe having an ill-fated after-party following some intense rehearsals, in which they believe their sangria has been spiked. The troupe are agitated and irrational, starting a witch hunt to punish the individual they believe has tainted the drink before going on to pursue increasingly dangerous acts. With an ensemble cast, the film covers a lot of ground and a lot of individuals' movements throughout the night. As the drug's hallucinogenic effect gets increasingly severe, everything gets more frenzied and deadly. By the end of the night, there's no way anyone could have foreseen how things would end up. The plot's ending consequences are just as nauseating as the sights and sounds of the film, and I mean this in the best possible way. If there was ever a film to be an approximation of a really terrible night full of despair, debauchery, and drug-induced madness, then this is certainly a great example. And with that, we've reached the end of this list of the 10 most disorientating horror films. If there's any more wild ones you would have included on this list, then let us know in the comments below. And remember to check out whatculture.com for more lists and articles like this every single day. As always, I've been Amy from What Culture, and I'll catch you next time.